At my 40th birthday party, my brother broke my 14-year-old son's ribs with a baseball bat, just for refusing to lend him a bicycle. My parents justified it. I didn't say anything, I just acted. My whole family panicked. A month later, in the courtroom, the judge announced my sentence. It was my 40th birthday, June 18, 2022, in Lincoln, Nebraska. I wanted something simple. A quiet meal with my wife Laura, our 14-year-old son Tomas, and our 10-year-old daughter Sophie. A chocolate cake, a few beers, nothing more. But Laura and the kids convinced me to throw a big party in the backyard. "Henry, it's your 40th, you have to celebrate," Laura said with a smile. I don't like being the center of attention, but I gave in. The yard filled up with tables, balloons, and the smell of meat on the grill. The day was going well. The kids were running around on the lawn, playing with water guns. My friend Mike was at the grill, showing off his ribs. Laura, in her blue dress, made sure everyone had food and drinks. I was sitting with a beer, relaxed for the first time in days. It had been a heavy week at the accounting office, and this felt good. There were neighbors, friends from work, and family. Everything seemed perfect. Then my brother Brandon arrived with his wife Karen and their 12-year-old son, Christopher. Brandon has always been a problem. He's 35 but acts like the world owes him something. He's impulsive, the type to get angry over nothing. I noticed he arrived with a sour look on his face, but I ignored it. It was my birthday. I didn't want any drama. Tomas was in a corner of the yard showing off his new bicycle. We had given him a blue mountain bike for his birthday a month earlier, and he adored it. He spent hours pedaling through the neighborhood and took care of that bike as if it were his life. Christopher walked over and asked to borrow it. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw Tomas shaking his head. I assumed he didn't want to share it. It was new, and he's careful. Christopher walked away annoyed and ran to Brandon. I didn't think much of it. Kids argue. No. But then I saw Brandon get up with a look that sent shivers down my spine. He grabbed a baseball bat the kids were using to play and walked toward Tomas. "Come here," he yelled. Everyone in the yard turned. Tomas, confused, leaned the bike against a tree and approached him. "Why won't you lend the bike to Chris?" Brandon said in a tone I didn't like at all. Tomas, calm but firm, replied, "It's mine, I don't want to lend it out yet." I don't know what Brandon expected. Maybe for Tomas to apologize or hand over the bike without a fuss, but my son isn't like that. He's stubborn, like me. What happened next was like a nightmare. Brandon raised the bat and brought it down on Tomas's chest. The cracking sound was horrible, like something breaking deep inside. Tomas fell to the ground, screaming, his hands clutching his chest. The yard fell silent. Laura let out a scream and ran to our son. I stood up, but my legs wouldn't respond. I couldn't believe it. My brother had hit my son with a bat over a bicycle. "What's wrong with you, Brandon?" I shouted, running towards him. He looked at me as if I were overreacting and said, "The brat needs to learn to share." That was it. Rage blinded me. I grabbed the bat he had dropped and hit him in the shoulder with all my strength. Another crack. Brandon fell, howling in pain. Karen started screaming. The guests were in an uproar. My parents, Helen and George, were in the yard. They ran to Brandon, not to Tomas. "What did you do to your brother, Henry?" my mother shrieked. "Tomas should have shared. This wouldn't have happened," my father said. I couldn't speak. Fury and disbelief left me speechless. Laura was with Tomas, who could barely breathe. Sophie was crying, clinging to her mother. I called 911, trying not to lose my mind. The ambulance arrived with the police. The paramedics took Tomas to the hospital, and Laura went with him. I stayed behind, explaining to the officers while Karen screamed at me that I was a monster. My parents defended Brandon, saying I had lost control, that Tomas was the selfish one. Not a single word about my injured son. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Tomas had 2 broken ribs. He would recover, but he would need weeks of rest. Laura was devastated, crying and furious. I didn't know what to feel. I had hit my brother. Yes, but he attacked my son first. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just stand by, but what hurt the most was that my parents, my own family, were on Brandon's side. They said Tomas brought it on himself by not sharing. I couldn't understand it. That night, while Laura stayed with Tomas, I went home with Sophie. I didn't sleep. I couldn't get the sound of the bat hitting my son out of my head, nor the look on Brandon's face, without a hint of remorse. I knew this wouldn't end there. The police were already investigating, and the security cameras in the yard had recorded everything, but they had also recorded me hitting Brandon. I didn't regret defending my son, but I knew this would have consequences. The following days were chaos. The police came to the house, asked questions, took statements. Child Protective Services got involved to make sure our home was safe for Tomas and Sophie. Every conversation was like reliving the moment, and every time I spoke with my parents, they continued to blame Tomas. If he had just shared, none of this would have happened, they repeated. I don't know how I didn't explode. What came next was even worse, but that's for another chapter. I'll just say that my family, the one I thought would always be there, broke that day. And I had to decide how to protect my own, no matter the cost. The days following the incident at my birthday party were a whirlwind. Tomas was in the hospital with 2 broken ribs, and Laura barely left his side. I was going back and forth between the hospital and the house, trying to keep Sophie calm while dealing with the police and Child Protective Services. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bat hitting my son. I heard the crack of his ribs and then Brandon's remorseless voice saying that Tomas needed to learn to share. My blood was boiling, but I had to keep a cool head for my family. The police reviewed the security camera footage we had in the yard. We had installed them a year earlier after a package was stolen from the porch. I never thought they would be used for something like this. The images were clear, Brandon raising the bat, hitting Tomas without hesitation, and then me, losing control and hitting him back. I didn't regret defending my son, but I knew my reaction put me in trouble. The officers were professional but serious. They explained that although Brandon was the aggressor, I would also face assault charges. It's understandable, Mr. Miller, one of them said, but the law doesn't distinguish between defending someone and attacking. I nodded, though inside I wanted to scream. What destroyed me the most was my parents' attitude. Helen and George called every day, but not to ask about Tomas. They wanted to know how Brandon was, if his shoulder would heal soon, if they could visit him in the hospital. Not a word about my son, their grandson, who was laid up with tubes and painkillers. One afternoon, my mother called and said, "Henry, you have to understand your brother. He was upset. Christopher wanted the bicycle. Tomas should have shared." I hung up without responding. I couldn't listen anymore. My father left a message later, saying I was the one who had made everything worse by hitting Brandon. "You're the older one, you should set an example," he said. I felt a knot in my stomach. An example. My son was hurt, and they were defending the guy who attacked him. Laura was furious. When I told her what my parents were saying, she smashed a mug against the kitchen wall. "How dare they," she yelled. "Tomas is a child, and they're blaming him. What kind of grandparents are they?" I didn't know what to say. Sophie, who was doing homework at the table, looked up and asked, "Why are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" I told her it wasn't us, that they were just confused, but I was lying. It was clear my parents had chosen a side, and it wasn't ours. A week after the incident, Tomas came home. He was pale, with a tight bandage around his chest. The doctor said he would heal, but he couldn't do any physical activity for weeks. He tried to seem strong, but I saw it in his eyes. He was scared. Not of Brandon, but of what this meant for our family. One night, as I was helping him get into bed, he told me, "Dad, I feel like this is all my fault. If I had just lent him the bike." I didn't let him finish. "No, Tomas, none of this is your fault. Your uncle did something horrible, and no one has the right to blame you." He looked at me and nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. Then came the blow I didn't expect. One afternoon, while Laura was at the supermarket, Tomas called me from his room. "Dad, I need to tell you something." His voice was trembling. I sat on his bed, and he explained that Brandon had contacted him not directly, since he was in custody, but through Karen. She sent Tomas a message telling him that if he said it was all an accident, they would buy him a new console, games, even another bicycle. She told me they didn't want to get Dad in trouble, Tomas said with tears in his eyes. "What did I do wrong, Dad? Why do they hate me?" They didn't hate Tomas, but they did want to save Brandon at any cost. I was furious, but I tried to stay calm. I told Tomas he had done the right thing by telling me. That night, Laura and I decided to record any future interactions. We didn't trust Karen or Brandon, and certainly not my parents, who seemed willing to back them up. I called our lawyer, a quiet guy named Robert whom we knew from work. I told him everything, and he said the bribery attempt was serious. "If you can prove it, it changes everything," he said. "But be careful, Henry. This is going to get ugly." And ugly it got. 2 days later, Karen showed up at our house unannounced. Sophie was at school, and Tomas was resting in his room. Laura was at work, so it was just Tomas and me. Karen rang the doorbell as if she wanted to break the door down. I let her in but told her I didn't want any trouble. "I just want to talk to Tomas," she said with a fake smile. "We want to fix things." I didn't believe her for a second. I called Tomas but told him not to speak unless I was present. I turned on my phone's voice recorder without Karen noticing. Karen sat in front of Tomas and started with the same story, that it was all a misunderstanding, that Brandon didn't mean to hurt him, that if he said that in court, everything would be resolved. She offered him money, a console, even a trip to an amusement park. Tomas, bless his heart, didn't fall for it. "I'm not going to lie," he said in a firm voice. "You and Uncle Brandon are trying to buy me, but I'm not going to say it was an accident. He hit me because I wouldn't give him my bike." Karen's face turned red, she stammered something, and left, saying we would regret it. That recording was gold. We gave it to Robert, who presented it to the prosecution. The case against Brandon was strengthened, but I also knew that my reaction with the bat put me in a complicated position. Robert explained that although I acted to protect Tomas, the law didn't look kindly on me using violence. "We can argue self-defense or defense of others," he said, "but it won't be easy." I nodded. I didn't care what happened to me, as long as Brandon paid for what he did. Meanwhile, my parents were still in their own world. They sent me an email saying I was destroying the family by pressing charges against Brandon. They said I should drop the complaint, that everything could be resolved privately. Laura blocked them on her phone. After that, my Aunt Susan, the only relative who seemed to understand, called to say she was with us. "What Brandon did is unforgivable," she said. "And your parents are blind for defending him." Her support was a relief, but it didn't fill the void left by the rest of my family. The trial was approaching, and the tension at home was unbearable. Tomas had nightmares. Sophie kept asking why we didn't see her grandparents, and Laura and I barely slept. But the worst was yet to come. One night, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Brandon, from jail. I don't know how he got a phone, but his voice was pure venom. "You're going to pay for this, Henry," he said. "You and your son are going to regret this." I hung up, but I couldn't shake the chill. This wasn't over, and I knew it. That call left me unsettled. I didn't tell Laura right away because I didn't want to worry her more, but the next day I spoke with our lawyer, Robert. I told him what Brandon had said, and he recommended I report it to the police. This could be considered witness intimidation, he explained. If he has access to a phone in jail, he's breaking more rules. We filed a report, and although they found no proof of the call, they increased their surveillance of Brandon. I didn't feel safer, but at least I knew they were taking the case seriously. The trial took place a month after the incident, in July 2022. The courtroom was full, but not with support for us. My parents, Helen and George, were sitting behind Brandon next to Karen. They looked at me as if I were the villain. My Aunt Susan and my cousin David were the only family members who sat on our side. Laura held my hand tightly, and Tomas, still in pain from his ribs, was by my side, pale but determined. Sophie stayed with a neighbor. We didn't want her to see this. The prosecutor presented the evidence, the security camera footage showing Brandon hitting Tomas without provocation, the audio of Karen trying to bribe my son, and the testimony of a neighbor who saw everything from his yard. They also presented Tomas's medical report, detailing the 2 broken ribs and the recovery time. When it was Brandon's turn to speak, his lawyer tried to paint him as a frustrated father who lost his temper because Tomas wouldn't share his bike. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. Lost his temper. He had attacked a child with a baseball bat. My case was more complicated. Robert argued that I acted to protect Tomas, that my reaction was instinctive upon seeing my son hurt. The prosecutor agreed that my intent wasn't criminal but insisted that I had used violence. Mr. Miller, we understand your pain, the prosecutor said, but we cannot allow people to take justice into their own hands. I nodded, knowing he was right, even though I didn't regret stopping Brandon. The worst part was when my parents testified. My mother, in tears, said that I had always been overprotective and that I had exaggerated by hitting Brandon. My father went further. Tomas provoked his uncle. If he had shared the bike, none of this would have happened. Laura squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Tomas looked down, and I knew those words hurt him more than the bat. They're heartless, Susan muttered from our side. She was right. When Tomas took the stand, my heart stopped. He spoke in a clear, though trembling, voice. He recounted how Brandon hit him, how Karen tried to bribe him, how he felt betrayed by his grandparents. I just wanted to protect my bike, he said. I didn't do anything wrong. The judge, a woman with a serious expression, listened to him attentively. When he finished, she looked at me and gave me a small smile. In that moment, I knew my son was stronger than I would ever be. The judge announced the sentences at the end of the day. Brandon was sentenced to 5 years in prison for child abuse and assault, plus an order to pay $50,000 in compensation to our family. He was also prohibited from coming near us after his release from prison. When I heard the verdict, I felt a relief I hadn't expected. But then it was my turn. For my assault on Brandon, I received a suspended sentence and 1 year of probation, no jail time, as long as I committed no further offenses. Robert gave me a pat on the back. It's the best we could have hoped for, he said. Laura cried, this time with relief. We left the courthouse in silence. My parents tried to talk to me in the hallway, but I ignored them. I had nothing to say to them. Susan and David invited us to dinner that night, and for the first time in weeks, we laughed a little. Tomas even joked about how he was now the kid with ribs of steel, but behind his smile, I saw the pain not just physical, but the pain of knowing his family had betrayed him. The following months were hard. Tomas started therapy to deal with the nightmares and fear. Sophie, in her innocence, kept asking about her grandparents, but Laura and I decided to cut off contact with them. We couldn't let their toxic excuses hurt our children anymore. Karen tried to contact us once, asking to talk as a family, but we blocked her. Brandon never communicated again from prison, but I learned from Robert that he continued to cause trouble even in there. 3 years later, in 2025, life is different. Tomas, now 17, is in his senior year of high school. His ribs have healed, but the emotional scars are still there. He's quieter than he used to be, but he's finding his way. He recently started dating a girl from his school, and seeing him smile again is a gift. Sophie, at 13, is a force of nature. She and Laura are the glue that holds us together. I'm still at my accounting job, and although the stress never goes away, I strive to be present for my family. We cut all contact with my parents and Brandon. Susan and David are now our closest family, along with some friends like Mike who never hesitated to support us. The compensation Brandon had to pay helped with the medical bills and Tomas's therapy, but it doesn't erase what happened. Sometimes I look at photos from that birthday and feel a pang in my chest. What should have been a happy day became the day I lost my parents, my brother, and the idea of what my family was. But if I learned anything, it's that family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you choose. Laura, Tomas, Sophie, Susan, David, they are my home. And although the road has been hard, I don't regret acting that day. Protecting my son was worth every consequence. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I wonder if my parents will ever understand the damage they did. But then I look at my children, and I know it doesn't matter. We are together, and that is enough.